Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of the newspaper analysis from the civil service examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Daily edition dated 22nd March 2023. The important topics which are to be discussed have been displayed on your screen, and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So now let us begin our today's session. This is our first topic. This topic has appeared at page number 8 in today's The Hindu Daily edition. The topic reads, A Grave Mistake in Great Nicobar. So the immediate context of this very news article is that the Government of India, on recommendation of Niti Aayog's planning, is advocating for the socio-economic advancements of Andaman and Nicobar Island region. And for this, the government has approved a lot of mega projects ranging from infrastructure projects like International Airport to the International Transshipment Port. So in this very regard, this article has come up with the perspective that despite the fact that development is essential for that particular region, but that development must not come at the cost of ecological losses. So that is why in today's session we are going to deal that what is the project all about. We will also see some of the important locations in this particular region because as the prelims exam is approaching, so every year there are around 2 to 3 questions based on the location in India. Then we will also understand about the basics of Andaman and Nicobar Island Integration Development Corporation Limited. So let us have a look at what is the project all about. The holistic development of the Great Nicobar Island project aims to develop 5 important things. One is an international transshipment port which will be located at the Galathea Bay. Now this location is very important. Remember, Galathea Bay is in the Great Nicobar Island. Second, an international airport to support around 4,000 passengers. Third is a 450 megawatt gas and solar based power plant. Next, ecotourism and residential township of about 160 square kilometer. And next, offices of multinational corporations. So in order to develop this particular island region economically, these are certain infrastructure projects which are going to be established in that particular region. But in today's article, the author has come up with certain probable ecological losses in this regard. So for this to understand, first let us see that what is the location of this region. As you can see that Andaman and Nicobar Islands is located in the Bay of Bengal region, which is divided in 2 major parts, Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So this portion is the Andaman Islands and this is the Nicobar Island groups. Both these island groups are separated by 10-degree channel. As far as the Andaman Islands are concerned, from north to south, we have North Andaman, Middle Andaman, Lower Andaman, and then Little Andaman. Now this Little Andaman is very important because not the Lower Andaman, but the Little Andaman is the southernmost point of the Andaman Island regions. Next comes the Nicobar region. In Nicobar also we have 2 major parts. In the north side we have Car Nicobar and in the southern side we have the Great Nicobar. If you see this particular map, this is the map of the Great Nicobar region. Now here important points are, on the eastern side we have the Andaman Sea, on the western side we have the Bay of Bengal. Further, Galathea National Park, Campbell Bay National Park and Reserved Buffer Zone. All these 3 are the important parts of Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve. So again I am repeating this, remember this thing, Galathea National Park, Campbell Bay National Park and Reserved Buffer Zone. All these are the part of Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve. So these facts are important from the prelims perspective. Further, the Andaman and Nicobar Island Integration Development Corporation Limited, in short it is known as ANITCO, it was incorporated under the Companies Act 1956 for the economic growth of the islands. The main objective of corporation is the holistic and sustainable development of the territory. So the important word over here is the sustainable development, and this is the important word because of which the author has criticized all these projects. The reason being, first, Andaman and Nicobar region houses a huge diversity of mangroves. Now, these mangroves act as a shelter in case of tsunamis, cyclones, or storms and protect the population as well as wildlife species on the landward area from the marine region. But if hyperdevelopmental aspirations persist in that particular region, then these mangroves will be the first victims. Reason being the huge scale deforestation which will take place in this particular area. Now, government has said that as a compensation to this deforestation, they will do compulsory afforestation in some other region. As some of you might be aware about, that the Forest Conservation Rules 2022 allowed the government to have a compensatory afforestation in some other region, which means let us suppose there is one area, region A, whereby deforestation has to occur because for the establishment of certain developmental projects. So, as a compensation, afforestation can be taken in some other areas. For example, B. The reason is that there were certain areas whereby the infrastructure projects were set up, but because that region did not have a vacant space and compensatory afforestation could not be taken, so that is why the government allowed and gave the flexibility that the land restriction must not be the only reason that why someone is not doing the afforestation activity. So that is why it allowed that the afforestation as a compensation can be done in other regions so that the overall forest area must not be deteriorated. But then the issue is, let us understand this, that the trees or the tropical evergreen trees which were present in the Nicobar region, can they be actually compensated in real sense by planting the trees in states of MP or Haryana? Because both these regions, that is Andaman Nicobar region and this northern Indian region, they have different ecology. Their carbon sink potential is different. They have different natural vegetation, wildlife species. So can this really happen that if the government plants the trees in this particular region, it will compensate all the deforestation which is taken place in the Nicobar region? This is the one issue. Second, as we all know, the presence of diverse coral species in this particular area. So as you all know that coral species are very sensitive to the changes in temperature or composition of the oceans. So if these infrastructure projects are being laid down in these regions, there are very high chances of pollution of these coastal and marine waters. So that is why coral species will also face extreme threats because of these activities. Next, this region also houses significant wildlife species. For example, the most important one, the line-tailed macaques. So this invasion in the natural habitat of these wildlife species are bound to have detrimental effect on them. Fourth point is that this particular region also houses some of the most particularly vulnerable tribal groups. For example, Shompeens, Sentinelese, etc. So again, these infrastructure projects might also have negative effect on the living styles of these tribal groups. There can be a direct interference in their cultural practices. So these are certain issues and challenges related to the developmental projects in this particular region. So that was all about today's article. The challenges, basics of UNITCO, location of various islands and groups, brief detailing of the project and the context. This topic has appeared at the text and the context page. The topic reads Understanding Waste to Energy Plants. Now, we all are aware that in the backdrop of focusing towards the cleaner energy on one hand and on the other hand managing the waste to energy plants can help us to achieve our both the objectives, and that is why the government is also promoting these days waste to energy plants. In this very line, the Kerala government recently has announced the state's first waste to energy project in Kozhikode. So this was the immediate context of today's news article. So that is why in this line in today's session we are going to discuss that what exactly do we mean by waste to energy projects, why we should promote waste to energy, why we should promote waste to energy plants, what are the merits, what are various problems associated with these plants, and what can be a way forward. So, this is also a very short topic. Let us discuss it in detail. First is that what exactly do we mean by waste to energy plants? See, first of all, we should understand that wet waste, solid waste, gaseous waste, all these are potential high impact resources for the domestic production of biofuels, bioproducts, heat, as well as electricity. Waste represent a significant and underutilized set of feedstocks for renewable fuel and product generation. So that is why waste to energy or energy from waste is the process of generating energy, especially electricity or heat from the primary treatment of waste. So in a way we can also call that it is basically a energy recovery. So now why are we promoting waste to energy or what are the merits? First is the waste management, sanitation and Swachh Bharat mission. So as we can understand that if we are using the waste to generate the electricity, in a way we are also managing the waste. So that is why it helps us for the waste management and promoting cleanliness as it is envisaged by the Swachh Bharat mission. Second is the huge amount or the quantitative aspect. In India, around 62 million tons of waste is generated every year by the cities only. That is just the urban waste. We are not taking the rural waste. Just from the cities every year, 62 million tons of waste is generated, which we can use it as a fuel. So just imagine that how much potential this waste has for our electricity generation. Further, the data also suggests that the municipal solid waste to energy market is growing at approximately 9.5% every year. And not just the municipal solid waste. According to FAO, it says that 40% of the food which is produced is wasted in India. And this organic waste can be used for energy generation. Further, it also helps us avoiding the landfilling as well as the resource recovery. So, how the resource recovery can take place? It can take place. Let us imagine that there was a heap of waste which I took it to the incineration plants, and after burning, there are certain valuable resources such as metals which I can collect from that heap. So, in a way, I am also able to recover certain metallic resources which could not burn. Also, it is a renewable form of energy. The total estimated energy generation potential from urban and industrial organic waste in India is approximately 5690 megawatt. So again, this shows the potential of energy generation from this scraps of waste. From the economic perspective, it also provides new business opportunity. New startups can be initiated around this concept. It can also provide several employment opportunities, etc. And therefore, it also provides the international expansion possibilities for the Indian companies and potential to tap the foreign markets. Now, according to Ministry of MNRE, there exists a potential of about 1700 megawatts from the urban waste and 1300 megawatts from the industrial waste. Despite all these merits, the Center for Science and Environment says that nearly half of India's waste to energy plants, WTE plants, are defunct because there are certain problems or challenges associated with it. First is the inefficiency. It is said that municipal solid waste in India has low calorific value and high moisture content. Further, the unsegregated waste also reduces the efficiency to generate the energy out of the mixed waste present in India. Second, this waste to energy generation can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, but it is not purely green. The reason being there are high CO2 emissions. Almost all the carbon content in the waste that is burnt is emitted as carbon dioxide. Similarly, there are several carcinogenic chemicals which are released due to chlorinated hydrocarbons like PVC. These chemicals can also lead to detrimental health impacts. Further, the electricity which is generated from these plants have higher cost compared to the conventional sources of electricity. For example, the electricity generated out of these plants is priced on an average at rupees 7 per kilowatt hour. But the electricity which we get from coal is around 3 to 4 per kilowatt hour. So the cost is also on the higher side. Further, there are several technologies for this WTE generation, for example, biomethanation, but these technologies are still imported in India. And then there are certain protests as well as criticisms from the civilians also, for example, against the Okhla WTE plant in Delhi. So these are certain issues associated with the WTE plants, and that is why nearly half of these plants are lying defunct. So now what can be a way ahead? First, we must ensure the segregation of the solid waste. And for this, we must ensure the compliance of Municipal Solid Waste Rules 2000. Similarly, for phasing out of PVC, we must focus on the latest waste management rules. Strengthening of municipal corporations with funds, functions, and functionaries in order to have a better efficiency while dealing with such a huge amount of waste. We can also go for the PPP model for WTE plants as recommended by Task Force on WTE headed by Kasturi Ranjan. Further, awareness and sensitization around this concept is also important, but just the awareness will not do, because we must understand that the people are profit driven, and therefore we must market this concept showing the economic potential of this concept to the general public, so that new startups can be initiated and people are more inclined towards these plants in order to generate electricity as well as in order to manage the waste. So this was all about this particular topic.
This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared on page 6, that is the editorial, and talks about an important China-led framework known by the term Global Security Initiative or GSI. Now recently China has introduced the Global Security Initiative concept paper. It is just at the concept stage, hence we are going to analyze only the basic standards and the tenets and the 5 important pillars of this concept or the initiative. According to many Western countries, this is nothing but a China-led framework that has been pushing China on the larger platform as the global leader. Now, what this initiative is all about and how this initiative is going to help us for our preparation is going to be the main theme for today's discussion. Now, China, as we all know, is going for the assertive diplomacy, be it the Belt and Road Initiative or its instance on South China Sea. Chinese establishments, Chinese government has been more assertive towards bringing its own rule and law and order in order to make benefits on its own side. Now, China is playing its own card on the small and developing countries through the checkbook diplomacy, or is trying to intervene with its neighbor on the border issues, for example with India or even Bhutan. The role of China through its world politics has been in the darker side. Despite the fact of its negative approach and negative outlook, since its denial to take the accountability of the COVID-19, China has come up as a selfish country in the geopolitics across the world. Now, if we talk about the basic tenets or the 5 pillars of this global security initiative, these are as follows. The first one is mutual respect. Mutual respect here simply means the respecting each other, the countries and the international organization. China has called for the mutual respect of the United Nations Charter as well as the international law. According to China, countries should abide by these important laws, rules, regulations in order to have better cooperation on the international front. However, according to many Western thinkers as well as the Western nations, and here I would say India will also align with the Western democracies and the countries, is that China itself is being more assertive to the smaller countries and does not respect the rights of the others. For example, in South China Sea, China has been assertive with respect to the movement of its own vessels. On the other hand, it has restricted utilization of exclusive economic zone with the other countries in Southeast Asia, especially the members of ASEAN. And that is the reason why China itself has disrespected the UN clause order on the South China Sea. The second pillar is the openness and the inclusivity. This principle actually calls for openness to discuss the international issues and resolve them through the consensus. It also respects the inclusive rights of certain countries on certain resources. However, I would like to quote the same example, that is the South China Sea issue, where China has never respected the openness of the sea lanes of communication and has denied the inclusive rights of the other South Asian countries with respect to the utilization of international waters. The third aspect or the pillar of this initiative is the multilateralism. Despite this, China is one of the prominent factor of the trade war. China has been dumping its cheap exports to those countries which cannot afford to buy the expensive ones. And even after calling for the multilateralism, China has been more involved in the bilateral relations with respect to the developmental politics. For example, if we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, China has been signing deals with the individual countries instead of signing it with all the important members. The same is true with respect to the String of Pearls. Development of port cities in and around India is not based on the collective effort or the multilateralism. It is based on the individual nations and the bilateral relations that China shares with those countries. The fourth pillar is the mutual benefit through development. Here we are going to take the example of China's involvement in Africa. Now, as far as development is concerned, so China has invested a lot of money in African continent. But despite that, the entire development is not based on the benefits to the destination country. Instead, it is more on the benefit of China. And this is one of the reasons why Chinese involvement is now being called as neo-imperialism and neo-capitalism. The last pillar is the holistic approach on the security matter. Although through this approach or initiative, China has called for bringing a holistic approach to solve the security issue. But China on its own has been the most insecure country with respect to the border issues, movement on the international waters, as well as the trade matters. For example, if we take the case of COVID-19, China has denied its accountability in the reduction or the controlling of COVID-19 virus in 2019 and early 20. In terms of the border issues, China has been very assertive in declaring the borders shared with the other countries on its own without proper discussions. If we take the example of India, for instance, China has been fueling the insurgent movement in countries which are very poor, for example Myanmar, and these countries are used as the source, using the funds coming from China to attack Indian territories. So despite calling for these important 5 pillars through the Global Security Initiative, the role of China has been very questionable. It is just a matter of fact that the international order is going to reject all these 5 pillars given the instance that China has been taking. If China wants to move ahead with these 5 pillars of the Global Security Initiative, China has to amend its own geopolitical approach with respect to how it sees the other countries, especially the neighboring countries like India. With this discussion in place, let us now move to the next article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared on page 1st as a lead article. It says that the Supreme Court bench headed by D.Y. Chandrachud, the Chief Justice of India, has sought data on the alternatives to hanging. Now, hanging means death penalty or the capital punishment given in India. Supreme Court has asked central government to provide data which may point to a more dignified, less painful and socially acceptable method of executing prisoners other than the death by hanging. Now in India, hanging and shooting are the two methods that are used as a capital punishment. However, among both these, hanging is the widely used method. This article does not talk about the view of the Supreme Court or the judiciary with respect to the continuation of capital punishment or not. It simply says that if there is a provision of hanging in the Indian laws, including the Indian Penal Code, Criminal Procedure Code and others, it should be more dignified. The capital punishment given in India should be more dignified and socially acceptable rather than just hanging a person till death. The relevance of this article comes from the GS paper 2 under the provision of Indian Constitution, that is Article 21, and the functioning of the executive and the judiciary. The content for today's discussion would include what is a death penalty, what is the method which is adopted while executing a death sentence in India, issues which are involved in death sentence, especially the ethical issues, important Supreme Court judgments with respect to the death penalty methods and their failure rates, alternatives available for the death penalty and the global trends. So if we talk about the importance of death penalty, well, it is an act of the state. Please understand this. Death penalty as a definition calls for the act of the state and not the private body of executing an individual as a matter of punishment. So it is given as a form of punishment and nothing else, and that too for a crime. And it has a legal backing. Why? Because Article 21 of the Indian Constitution says that every citizen of India has this fundamental right to life. But if state, that is the government, wants to take away the life of a person, then it should be done with the procedure established by law. So there is no death penalty without law. If there is no law which says for a particular action or for a particular crime a person should be provided death penalty, he or she should not be given the death penalty and should not be hanged. So it is an act of a state executing an individual for the punishment of a crime. It is practiced in India since the British era. It is abolished in 109 countries. That does not mean that they are just leaving up or commuting the person. They are just not killing the culprit. It is retained in 55 countries including India, and there are some countries who do not practice such kind of provisions at all. The legal provision in India includes the Code of Criminal Procedure 1898, which was amended regularly, and the punishment for the murder was death penalty. According to the 35th Law Commission also, which gave its report in 1967, says that death penalty should be retained because it acts as a deterrence and creates fear among the criminals. But the human psychology says that when the emotional failure comes into the mind of a person, that fear does not find place. Section 354 Clause 3 of the CRPC says that special reasons have to be given by the judicial magistrate or the court judge while awarding the death penalty. In most of the cases, it is given in the rarest of the rare case. The same section with clause 5 says that when any person is sentenced to death, the sentence shall direct that he be hanged by the neck till he is dead. So he will remain hanged until unless he or she dies. Now, hanged by the neck is considered to be inhuman, it is considered to be antisocial, and it is considered to be unethical in the civilized society. If we talk about the death penalty matter in India, there are two. First is hanging, the second one is shooting. So the hanging finds its place under 354 clause 5 of the CRPC, which talks about the method of execution as hanging. The second is shooting. It is done by a firing squad which fires bullets on the convict. There are only certain organizations such as Army, Air Force and Navy where it is being practiced. Now the question arises, what are the ethical issues involved with respect to the death penalty? The first is human rights violations. Many people argue that the death penalty violates the basic human right to life. The state taking personal life even if they have committed a serious crime is seen as a violation of human dignity, because the same state was actually being voted upon. was actually based on the mandate given by the citizens who were hanged. The second is the possibility of wrongful conviction. There have been numerous cases where the innocent people have been sentenced to death. This raises serious concerns about the reliability of the justice system and the risk of executing the innocent person. Then comes the botched execution. Botched execution means that when attempt was made to kill the person, but it did not go as planned, resulting in the unnecessary pain to a person, especially when a lethal injection is given. And the person which was charged with death penalty actually went into permanent disability. The fourth one is the inequalities in its application. So for example, death penalty is not uniform. There are more male members who are given death penalty. There are more African race people or the dark race people who are given death penalties. While there are poor people who get death penalty while the rich goes scot-free. Then comes the redistribution versus rehabilitation debate. Death penalty is often seen as a form of retribution rather than the rehabilitation. We are not allowing the person to change. This raises ethical issues about whether the state should be seeking revenge or working towards the rehabilitation of the offender. Is it just a matter of revenge that state is taking on the behalf of the victim? These ethical questions and issues should be answered before moving ahead with the debate whether capital punishment should have a human practice or not. If we talk about the international comparisons and the data, you'll find that there are various methods which are being used. For example, electrocution, firing squad, hanging, lethal gas, or even lethal injection. Surprisingly, firing squad is the one method where there is no botched execution. There is no person who survives after firing. While in terms of the lethal injection, the high botched execution rates proves that these 7% people did not die. They might have turned into a disabled person for life. So the data which Supreme Court is desiring is in this similar format. So India should also collect data on how these options could be taken up in India along with the hanging or replacing hanging practice altogether. If we talk about the important Supreme Court cases, because in the prelim examination Supreme Court cases are now becoming important. The first one is the case related to the 1980s known as Bachchan Singh versus State of Punjab, in which judiciary called for that death penalty should be given in the rarest of the rare case scenario. Hence, it should be avoided in as much possible cases as there are. The second is Machi Singh versus State of Punjab, again the same state 3 years later, in which court says that if a crime is committed, it should look into the manner it was committed, what was the motive, whether it was committed for self-defense or just to put harm on the person, whether it was anti-social or not, magnitude of the crime, that is how many people were injured or killed, personality of the victim. The last important case is Shatrughan Chauhan versus Union of India in 2014, in which undue, inordinate and unreasonable delay in the death penalty or the execution amounts to the torture on the ground of commutation of the sentence. Let's say a person was declared to be hanged on, let's say 31st March this year, but that person was not hanged for next 6 months. So those 6 months are going to be a mental torture to that person because he knows he is going to die, but he is going to die every day in his mental status. Now, these are the important alternatives that are used globally. The first one is life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Parole means temporary release. Under this sentence, offender is kept in the prison for rest of his life with no chance of release at all. Although over here the psychological impact on the convict is very high. The second is restorative justice. This is a process in which the offender is required to make amends for their crime, usually through community service, let's say financial restitution to the victim. This approach focuses on repairing the harm rather than the punishment. The third one is rehabilitation programs. This involves providing offender with the education, job training, counseling and other services that can help them to reintegrate into society and avoid future criminal behavior. These two are considered to be a very good with respect to the advanced and civilized society. The same is true with respect to the community service that they can provide against the crime they have committed. fines and other monetary penalties could be imposed on that particular person. However, under this, there is a discrimination between rich and poor. A rich person can easily do this and go scot-free. Then comes the suspended sentence. This is a sentence in which the offender is found guilty but not actually sent to prison. Instead, the sentence is suspended, which means that the offender is released but must adhere to certain conditions, such as regular check-ins with a probation officer or avoiding further criminal activity. The last one is the capital punishment moratorium. It means that there is a temporary or indefinite suspension of the death penalty, which allow time for the review and the reform of the justice system. The last one is the justice delayed purposefully to provide the avenue for the review petition. The last option is highly practiced in India because India also believes in the human nature of criminal justice system. So instead of just going to the capital punishment, these are the options that India can look into, experiment with, and instead of providing the other methods of death penalty, India can look into removing the number of provisions, number of crimes under the Indian Penal Code where death penalty is being awarded. That's all for today's Daily News Simplified. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more such updates.